He popped, and so much has happened since that time. Bob Thompson, consultant, obviously with his own company, and also former Fox Sports president, joins us. Craig Paul and David Smoak on 365 Sports. There seems like, I don't know if anything has changed, Bob, since the last time we spoke to you, but a lot of things are out there. What was your reaction, and thanks for your time and coming back on, what was your reaction when you saw that Apple TV Plus might be a player, so to speak, when it comes to the Pac-12?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me back. Good to talk to you guys. Apple's name has been floated, off and on for several months. In many cases, it was at the beginning, it was always Amazon/Apple and ESPN. Then it kind of went through a phase where it was just ESPN, Amazon. And, now for probably a variety of reasons, could be leaks with intended messages. Some could be leaks from the other side with intended messages. Apple's name has kind of surfaced to the forefront.
Bob, and we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, this thing is dragged for a bit here. But would it be a mistake to go all streaming, even though it might be the way of the future? It's certainly not the way of now. And that transition might not ever even happen the way that we predicted, based on how companies are losing money on that year to year.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think a couple of things. First of all, I think it would be probably not the smartest move to go 100% right now. I think certainly, sticking your toe in the water, having a streaming element. Pretty much every deal now has a streaming element. I mean, the Big 12's got the ESPN Plus, the Big 10's got the Peacock and the Paramount Plus, aspects to it. So I think it's smart to, get your toe in the water and distribute your product to people who may be cord cutters or maybe cord nevers. But to go 100% all in at this point on what I consider probably is going to be a 5-year deal, I don't think it makes that much sense. There's always an issue with trading distribution for dollars, and it doesn't always work out in the intended manner. Broad reach is still extremely important for your product in terms of alumni, in terms of donors, in terms of, potential students, across the board. It's very important. And that's why I think you see, many of the conferences are still going along that model with the huge reach with the broadcast and linear cable networks, but still having an element of streaming.
Do you think that's where it ultimately goes? As you said, like these next 5 years is probably not the smartest decision, and that kind of lines up when, all these deals will be coming up around the same time again. But in the future, beyond this next wave of this contract, do you think that is where we're all headed?
I don't know. There was an article yesterday that said that between Paramount, NBC, Warner Brothers, Discovery, and one other, I think, they lost $11 billion on streaming. Mm-hmm. Oh, the other was Disney. $11 billion on streaming. That's a lot of money. And, the Wall Street has definitely kind of done a round trip on this whole streaming thing. And initially they were looking for what are the new subscriber numbers? Well, now they're looking at not so much subscriber numbers. It's when are you going to make some money? And in order for those streamers to make money and make up that $11 billion in losses, they're going to have to charge a lot more. And so, if you're a guy and you have 4 or 5 streaming services, and now all of a sudden those streaming services are $20 or $25, you're now paying $100 and something. And all of a sudden your cable package or your satellite package that you may have cut looks pretty good right now. And you could actually see, maybe slowing down the number of people cutting a cord or dropping cable or satellite, and people, going back to the more traditional bundle aspect. But I think doing 5-year deals, nobody's got a crystal ball on this stuff. So doing 5-year deals is smart so that you don't miss out on some big reset of the television business, which I think is kind of what happened with the last round of deals that were 10 and 12 years long.
Bob, did those companies lose money because they were on this ridiculous hunt for content and, because they wanted to feed those subscriber numbers and say they constantly had new stuff, that eventually they hit a tipping point of where they put too much out and the quality wasn't good?
I think you're right, Paul. I think they probably overproduce, and I think that they're being much more selective in what they produce and how much of it they produce. You've got to have enough on there so that it's consistently appeals to a broad base of people who are buying that streaming service. The question becomes, though, is if these guys are going to get into sports, does that help the problem or does it make the problem even worse? And, a lot of that's just going to depend on, what you got to pay for the rights and how much you have to pay to produce it and how much of it there is. Sports has a very short shelf life. It's basically viewed live and then it goes away. Scripted dramas and things like that, those things can live on, Disney Plus or Netflix or whatever, forever. And people can watch them, years from now. As a sports event, that doesn't stand the test of time.
Bob, whether it's Apple TV Plus or whatever it might be, whether it's social media just from those and or media, is that the rumbling of any of this, is that like saber rattling and maybe the preemptive move of somebody making a change where they are right now in a conference?
I don't know about that. I really think that the conference, everything seems to be pretty stable right now, except the Pac-12 getting this deal done.
Mm-hmm.
The Pac-12 can get this deal done, and it gives the current members enough of a belief that the deal's going to be fine for the next 5 years, and in 5 years from now, this is all going to happen again. I guarantee you. But if they can get a deal done, I don't really think there's going to be movement because I don't think it's going to be that much of a difference one way or another. Versus where they might go, that they might get a few more bucks, but is it worth it to, cause us all this upheaval and, just to move for a few $1 million? And I don't see it happening. But if they can't get a deal, or if it's 100% streaming or something like that, that gives somebody a lot of heartburn, well then, who knows what's going to happen? I don't know. And I don't think anybody who out there tells you they know probably doesn't know either. But there's plenty of people to give you their opinions.
Are you alarmed at all, just from, if you were looking at it from the Pac-12 standpoint, is there reason to be alarmed by the situation they're currently in? Because on one side, it's like, oh, there's a deal that's going to get done, just wait, it's not going to be far off money-wise. But is there a little bit of an alarming element that it is seemingly so tough for them to land one right now?
Yeah, I think it's probably disconcerting to the members. I mean, it probably had a pretty good offer on the table sometime last summer, I would guess, kind of about the same time the Big 12 was looking at theirs. And it turns out that, timing was everything. And Brett made the right move for the Big 12 and was able to lock in, the linear folks of Fox and ABC / ESPN, and going to have good distribution. And then he's got his streaming element. Was there money left on the table? Back then I probably would have said yes, but fast forward 8 months and you've got, the economy's kind of in the toilet. You've got Disney telling ESPN to kind of back off on have to own everything. You've got Google and Amazon laying off thousands of people. You got Warner Brothers Discovery trying to absorb that whole deal, and on top of that, we kind of got an economic issue, and so everybody's kind of hunkered down. Then combine that with you've got the NBA out there, you've got NASCAR out there, you've got WWE out there, you've got UFC out there. These deals are all coming up, and those are those are must-haves for some of these folks. The NBA is hugely popular and important to Warner Brothers / Discovery, and also to ESPN. And those are, strong products. And I think people have gotten selective all of a sudden. And they probably also have some leverage that they haven't had in the past. And they're just not going to overpay just for, to own everything.
Well, speaking of that, as far as being all in on something, with all the changes and cutbacks and whatever else, streamers, is it true they want to be like the only game in town if they have something like the MLS or Major League Baseball on whatever night it is, or the NFL on Thursday nights? Is that really what they want? And would that be enough to have all of the Pac-12 to scratch their itch?
They've been very selective with what they bought, and in the case of certainly with Amazon has with the Thursday night football, and then they've done some Premier League and cricket and things like that overseas. Apple's taken a slightly different route. It's kind of the nights they have it, it's exclusive, and in the case of with baseball, and in the case of the MLS, they have it all. Although they did sublicense some games back to Fox, I think a game of the week, but other than that, they have it all. So I think it really just depends on the company. Some of them would prefer, if it's high profile enough, just to have a game of the week. If we're talking about Pac-12, maybe you're talking about a Friday night game of the week, where you're not up against a bunch of other games in other conferences at that time. And but the flip to that is, you got people like Amazon talking about building a sports app to be behind, on the Prime Video portal. And you're talking about, maybe ABC. Or obviously you have the ESPN Plus, but then you're also talking about Apple TV, wanting to have stuff for Apple TV, or you want to have a separate per fee, per sport charge for something like the Pac-12 on almost a pay per month basis. So some people, kind of are very selective, but if you're going to be building a portal, you need some tonnage. You need a bunch of stuff. You can't just have a game of the week. Nobody's going to pay you extra for a game of the week. You got to have a bunch of stuff. And so that then comes into, are they looking at the Pac-12 networks? Are they looking at Pac-12 networks to produce all their content for them on one of these streamers? Who knows? But I think one of the reasons it's taken a long time is because probably the number's not quite there. But the other thing is it's probably a new kind of configuration that the conference hasn't dealt with before. So there's probably a lot of legal work going on.
How much of this also slows it down that you worry about maybe the conference leaders trying to make up for the mistakes of the past? You mentioned Warner Brothers Discovery, and what's going on there right now is it's kind of a whirlwind of they're taking this and selling this to these properties and selling them to other things. They canceled several movies that were already done and just wrote them down. Like, how much, I know that the Pac-12 maybe can't just do that like Warner Brothers Discovery can, but how much do they need to maybe just say the Pac-12 network disaster is in the past, all this other stuff is in the past, let's deal in the now?
Well, I think there's probably some of that. The only thing that gives me pause on that is they just announced a deal to move the Pac-12 networks out of downtown San Francisco, where they had this very large lease, out to a suburb. And if you're going to shut the thing down and basically write it off, why would you go through that? So other than that, I think you're right. That's one way to do it. Is just, take your lumps and blame it on the past and, start with a clean slate going forward.
How smart and how thankful are the Big 12 members right now in the decision to go ahead and move early like they did a few months back?
Hindsight being 2020, they're very smart.
Right. Yeah.
I think at the time, it was, good timing. I think Brett had some good advice from his consultants, and they saw an opportunity to move fast, and he did that. And then on top of that, he was able to extricate himself from the Texas OU, 3-year divorce proceeding and move on from that as well. So, that brought in some cash, and Fox was happy with their new picks and some cash, and probably the remaining 8 schools are happy with whatever cash gets split amongst them, and maybe even the 4 new schools coming in get a little bit more than the $18 million or so they were promised at the beginning. So I think for the Big 12, it's been a great, 6 months, and, my congratulations to them. I think they played it very well.
Do you feel like that Yormark gained respect among college administrators or anyone in athletics along with what he did, but also from the networks, because he didn't just, like, they're not in the situation that somebody else is in? They got it done. They gained some traction and obviously stability.
Well, I think that it probably helped in the case of the networks that they all knew Brett.
Right.
They've all dealt with him over the years from, NASCAR and, the talent at Jay-Z's place. And certainly, we had dealings with him when he was at the NBA with the Nets. So it wasn't an unfamiliar place to anybody on the TV side of things. And I think while his manner and aggressiveness might be a little outside the norm that you normally see in the collegiate world, I think it's come across pretty good. And I think people are going like, wow, this guy's getting stuff done. And I think that's great.
Bob Thompson, former Fox Sports president, CEO, with us on 365 Sports. And, of course, a lot of the landscape in college athletics, media deals, and more, and streaming continue to be like a daily dose of something. Bob, you've been in this business. Why would somebody not reach out to you and ask you for your advice other than us and whoever else other shows you appear on?
Well, they have.
Okay.
I've got something. I'm doing some other stuff, and that kind of precludes me from being involved in this with a conference specifically on TV deals. But I've talked to people, and talked to a lot of the same folks everybody else talks to from a consultant standpoint, and it just didn't work out this round for me, and that's fine. I've got plenty of other things that are keeping me busy.
What would you do if you were George Kliavkoff? Would you sleep at night?
Probably with one eye.
And don't you think, Bob, he's taking a lot of the heat? It's his job. He knew it. But that Larry Scott left him with a lot of this that he had to deal with?
He was left with some things that were probably less than ideal. I mean, the Pac-12 networks thing is certainly a problem that he's had to deal with. But some of the other stuff, I think, is he the UCLA thing caught him by surprise, and it caught everybody by surprise. So it's hard to really blame that on George and his folks. But some of the other stuff is could be a combination of they got told some numbers that were unrealistic and they were never going to get in the first place, and they bought into them. And time will tell if that was the case or what. Or maybe it's just they don't the product value just isn't quite there in the eyes of the people out buying the rights. So there's a mixed calculation somewhere, or it's some sort of a unique type of deal that's going to it's going to take us all a month to deconstruct to see how it all works, because it's so different than what anybody's seen before. And that'll probably be the next time we talk, and try to explain how it all works and what it is.
Bob, why did they not 5-6 years in, when it was clear that DirecTV was never going to come on board with the Pac-12 networks, try to drastically revamp that then?
I don't know. That's a good question. I think the prior administration felt that maybe they would be able to write it out. I also heard that there was times when various entities made their existing partners, television-wise, made offers to take it over for them, and hopefully, along the lines of what the Big Ten Network and the SEC Network and the ACC Network, what those are, they could have hopefully quickly turned the Pac-12 networks into that, and that probably, again, hindsight being 2020, that would have been a very good decision at the time. So I think. There's plenty of blame to go around, but I think you can certainly hope going forward that the Pac-12 networks have some sort of life, either as a production entity or as a streaming service, or even as it is now as a linear network, but with wider distribution, because the folks there do really good work. I mean, at the times I have seen it and talking to people who I know, I've got a lot of friends on the West Coast who have it and get it. They say it's great. The talent's good, the production qualities are high, and it's a good product. The problem is it's just, nobody can see, a lot of people can't see it outside of cable systems on the West Coast.
Bob, you mentioned the OU Texas deal, and we've gotten this far without even really talking about that after such a wait and wondering how all of this would end with OU Texas and the Big 12. So now knowing that that's official and each side will be moving on after next season, what did you think of how that unfolded?
Well, I always thought it was a possibility. I mean, it was a difficult deal because you had 6 people involved. You had the 2 networks, Fox and ESPN. You have the 2 conferences in the SEC and the Big 12. And then you have the 2 schools in Oklahoma and Texas. And so you had it's kind of like a 3-dimensional chess game. You got to get everybody happy. And ultimately at the end is we kind of figured Fox would be the one who would either be actually holding it up or take the blame for holding it up, because other guys are pretty easy to satisfy. ESPN's happy to get the games early. They're happy to shut down Longhorn Network and Sooner Vision early. That's easy. I'm sure the SEC is very happy, and I'm sure the Big 12 is happy to get them out so that everybody remaining can move on. So that part was probably pretty easy. Then Fox is sitting here going, okay, I'm going to lose at least one OU Texas game if they go early. I'm going to lose, some other good matchups. They probably have OU and Texas, 4 or 5 times each every season. They had to be made whole. And I think probably initially the offers weren't there, and Fox just kept saying no until sooner or later they saw a number they liked and they got some picks that they liked. And it's all for the best. I don't think it does anybody good to have a long, prolonged divorce over something like this that, while complicated, there's enough trade fodder in there to be able to resolve it fairly easily.
Bob, what do you think the number needs to be, no matter how they get to that number, to make the Pac-12, Pac-10, whatever it's going to be, calm down? Is there a specific number per year they need to get to, in your opinion?
They probably have a number in their mind. I'm kind of precluded from talking about numbers these days, so
okay.
I'll defer to them. But it's got to be something that makes them comfortable that they're kind of within spitting distance of everyone else. And I'm not talking about spitting distance of Big Ten or SEC, but certainly of the other two, Power 5 conferences.
When Texas officially joins the SEC, is that also the day that the Longhorn Network dies? Because Del Conte and others have mentioned that being the case. You brought that up as well. And then what will ESPN do with that channel? Will they call it something else? Will it just dissolve? How does that work?
I think they'll just shut it down, because normally when you have a channel like that that's so specific, the carriage requirements with the distributors basically say this kind of product has to be on there. And, I'm sure Texas has to pledge all that content as part of their grant of rights to the SEC, and then it will ultimately go back to ESPN and the SEC, and that content will all pretty much be on the SEC network. So I would expect the channel just goes away as far as being carried on, your local cable system. As far as the operation, it wouldn't surprise me if they didn't somehow turn it into the, SEC Bureau West. I think they have one somewhere on the East Coast. I don't know if it's in, I don't know where it is, but it's Charlotte or something. But they have a production center out west would probably make sense, a little further west because of the number of schools that'll, certainly Texas, A&M, Missouri, OU. That makes sense. So I don't think that they'll continue as a channel, but certainly the entity or the operation might continue, but just under the SEC banner as opposed to Longhorn Network.
Yeah, they got a studio in Charlotte. Just look that up and double check that. Yeah, there's SEC studios in Charlotte, North Carolina. Bob, we've heard Brett Yormark and we've heard others kind of talk about the basketball side of this and, maximizing that in the future. He's mentioned that to what extent you can maximize that. Do you feel like college hoops are undervalued a little bit? Do you think that there is some hidden money there that maybe can be found, especially for a league that's, as of right now at least, the top league in America? Do you think that's a good strategy, or is basketball just kind of is what it is?
Well, it's interesting because basketball always used to be sold separately in many of the deals. And then at some point they all kind of merged together. It's can't really say a whole lot about, its value or anything like that. Okay. I think the tournament might be a little undervalued because primarily because it's an old deal, the NCAA men's tournament. So I think from that standpoint, I might give you an idea. Regular season, it just seems like it's a lot these days, and I haven't looked at numbers lately, so I can't really tell you what they're looking like. But I will say this, and that is, as far as Brett talking about trying to monetize the Big 12's basketball content, he's got a great conference right now. I mean, they're top to bottom. They are very, very good. And, put them up against any conference, anywhere. And they look real good. I just don't know when you start talking value, if, it will ultimately make sense to spin those type of things off on their own, or is it better to just negotiate a nice one big happy number for all of your content in the entire conference?
Bob, I don't know how you can answer this or not, but okay, so the Pac-12 loses USC and UCLA, two big brands, and then also there's the LA market to boot. The Big 12 loses two massive brands as well in history and tradition in Oklahoma, Texas. Is that in any way similar to what each lost, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think so. I think, certainly of the schools that were in the conference at those times, both of those were the probably the marquee names. Even though in both conferences, they kind of gone through a rough patch the last, say, 4 or 5 years. Oklahoma and Texas haven't ruled like they used to, and the same with USC until this year, and UCLA haven't really ruled. So, they're certainly hoping that the new neighborhood and the dollars that the new neighborhood affords them can help get them back to their previous glory. But yeah, I think it's pretty similar. You had the two big dogs for both conferences, heading down the road.
Thank you very much. How's your golf game? I know you had battled back from the shoulder injury and surgery. I always want to ask you that because you're not in an area where there are any golf courses. You turn left and right. It's like convenience stores.
Let's see. Well, I'm looking at the 8th green right now, and there's nobody here. It's like 40-mile-an-hour winds today in Scottsdale. And last week we had 2.5, 3-hour frost delays every day. So hasn't been, real conducive to golf, but that's fine. I'm working a little bit. So it keeps me indoors and keeps me on task.
I wish I would have thought more about when we were in Phoenix last week for the Super Bowl to just say hi, maybe even have some sort of appetizer with you, whatever else we could have been. But we were right there and it was beautiful. It was, but you're right. It was kind of chilly in the morning.
Yeah, it was a little cold, but it was a great week. I tell you, between the golf tournament here and then the Super Bowl, what a great week for the Valley here. They did a tremendous job, and I think everybody went home very, very happy.
Bob, just one more question before you go. I'd be remiss if I didn't ask about this, and I saw somebody in our chat bring it up as well. There's nothing official on the Pac-12 expansion front, but there has, as you've seen, been a lot of rumors about SMU, San Diego State, and what they could potentially do there. What did that tell you, that kind of started around the same time that there was talk about this deal? There were rumors about, well, they need to expand to be able to add more value. How did you break that down in your own, obviously knowledgeable analysis of the situation?
Well, because, the commissioner has always said TV first, expansion second. And then all of a sudden it was expansion first, or at least to the extent that they were talking to people or he was showing up at games in Dallas, that maybe somebody on the buy side was wondering who's going to be in this conference, how many people are going to be in this conference, and, how much inventory am I going to have? So that could have been some of the potential TV partners pressing, as opposed to just them saying, well, we'd like to go to 12, and we want you to pay pro rata on those 12. The TV guys are probably saying, well, yeah, we'd really like to know who it's going to be before we commit to that.
Okay. Bob, thank you, man. As always, anytime, the feedback that we get in our chat room and from elsewhere, those who are texting or tweeting, they love the segment with you. We appreciate your knowledge, experience, and glad to have you back on the show, and go hit them straight when you can.
All right, guys. You take care. Good to talk to you.
Bob Thompson, a wealth of knowledge. And I see at times even